Hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in. As always, I am Kaylee Batesman, the content director at She Can Code, and today we are discussing why you need a career in coding. A coding career can cover anything from a data scientist to a software engineer, programmer, UX designer, or even a video games developer. So if you love tech, enjoy problem solving, and are curious, a career in coding could be for you. Today, I have the fabulous Frances Sneddon, Chief Technology Officer at Simulate, and we'll be diving into what a coding career can look like, what skills you need, and why you don't necessarily need a degree to get ahead. Welcome, Frances.
Hi, Kelly. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Can we start with a little bit of background about yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Chief Technology Officer at Simulate Corporation, as you said. Simulate is a business process simulation software company. So we help people build simulations of their processes, whether that's a manufacturing line, a hospital department, a call centre, and allow people to test out their ideas in a risk-free environment. So what happens if you double your staff? What happens if you buy a second machine? Is it going to increase my throughput? And lots of other kind of different kind of applications. So yeah, it's a really interesting place to work with, and gets us into lots of different areas. It's really exciting.
Yeah. And why did you choose a career in technology? Are you going to say that you fell into tech, or did you plan it?
No, I did. I fell into it. So as you alluded to in your introduction, I don't have a computer science degree. My background is math statistics and something called operational research, which is sort of maths applied to business. And I, as part of my degree, between sort of third and fourth year, I did a summer internship actually at Simulate. So I did actually start there as an intern. And it was a software business, which 20 bit and a bit years ago. It was just sort of the year 2000, everybody's talking about the dot-com boom and things like that. So software businesses were something that I had never even heard about. It wasn't a thing that I was even contemplating. And then suddenly I was in a software business, not doing computing and coding at that point, but using the software to go across the world and do consultancy projects and things like that with it. And yeah, just sort of then from that kind of realized, actually, I really like software. I like building stuff. So yeah, so fell into it by accident, and have been there ever since.
Yeah, it's interesting though, you said building stuff. Was that probably something that you didn't realize until you got into it, that actually it's not about lots of numbers and coding, but you actually get to build real life projects and make projects that actually are bought by people, and perhaps you didn't realize that before you came in.
I think it's definitely, I think we talk about tech, or we talk about coding or software, but actually probably a closer description is product. It's products that we're kind of making. Mine happens to be a software product that I'm building. And yeah, it's the dots and the numbers and the variables, they all come together, and you push that amazing button, run or compile, depending what you're kind of in, and suddenly, boom, this thing that you have imagined, envisaged appears on screen. And yeah, it's addictive. There's nothing like that moment of just going, wow, I built something. So I think that's probably the part that a lot of people don't understand or just don't consider. We often, I think particularly at school and even through university, when people are introduced to coding, it's about having written a script to do a bit of a job, crunch a bit of kind of numbers and those kind of types of things. But yeah, what gets me really excited is that is exciting, but it's the building of stuff. It's creating that product.
Yeah, it's nice to hear that you studied a STEM subject, though. We hear a lot, especially at university, a lot of girls don't want to go on to study STEM subjects, but you studied maths. Was there something about that at school that probably drew you to want to continue your studies in that area?
Yeah, So up until I always enjoyed maths. Always enjoyed maths. It's the problem solving element of it. Give me a Sudoku code on a beach, and I'm in a happy place. And so I like solving problems. But actually, what I thought I was going to do, and was always the plan right up until the end of 6th year at high school here, that's what we call it in kind of Scotland, was I was going to be a lawyer. I'd done all the extra work to get the extra credits that you needed to make sure that you got into a good school. I'd done the extra Latin classes, so I was full on going to be a lawyer, and I was going to save every innocent person that had ended up in jail. That was it, probably because of what you saw on TV at the time. But actually ended up doing a mooting competition as sort of to try and supplement my application, and spoke to some of the law students there and realised this was not going to be the career that I thought it was going to be. There was going to be a lot more maybe sort of selling houses, and it was going to be a harder place for me to break into with my background than I expected it to be. So then I had to go back to first principles and just look at what did I enjoy and what was I good at, and that was maths. It was maths. And I knew it would give, I knew at that point, therefore, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I knew it would give me a generalised platform to go into it. In terms of being a girl and kind of doing that, it's 6th year at high school, doing your 6th year studies. There was a handful of girls and there was a handful of boys. It just never entered my head. It was never a consideration that as a girl, that wasn't something I would do. But I have to be candid and say my mum was a physics teacher. And so in our house, there was no jobs for the girls and no jobs for the boys. My mum was the one that fixed the car because she was quite mechanical. So there was never any context of, oh, she can't because it's technical or kind of anything like that. So probably I have to credit my mum with that sort of platform, that it just wasn't a consideration. I enjoyed it, so I picked it. And if I was going to be the only girl in the class, didn't care.
Yeah, it's interesting that you wanted to be a lawyer first because you saw it on TV, and that's something that we hear so much, that the technology role models, we know they're there, but trying to make sure that they're seen and they're visible to young girls. And I remember when I was younger, I wanted to be Kate Adie, the war correspondent, because she was on TV, and that's what I saw. My parents were horrified and thought, nope, she's not doing that. But I ended up going into journalism. But as you say, once you actually start to look at the careers that are more suited for you, they're not necessarily the ones that you might have seen on TV.
Yeah, but I do wonder if the reason sort of the war zone appealed to you was the same way that law appealed to me. I wanted to make a difference in the world, and so you see the role models that are presented to you and the ones that are allowing you to do that, and so you gravitate towards them. But yeah, when you're forced to kind of just step back and sort of say what are you good at, it does make you look at things differently. And I think I think people, not just girls, boys as well, need to know what the options are in a tech career. And a tech career doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to make the next big game for the PlayStation or Xbox. There's companies like Simulate that are out there where we are making the world a better place, but we're doing it through software. We're making changes to the world. Last week, I was hearing from one of our users who's a charity out in South Africa, and because of the software that I'm building, they are able to figure out how to double the number of people that are getting tested for HIV. Now, I'm not taking credit for the work, because the work that they do, that's the real difference. But I think it's those stories that need to get out there, of the breadth that's available of tech careers, and how do you get that onto television or wherever it else is that kids can be exposed to it. That's the challenge, and that's the challenge for girls and boys, to see the options.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with making sure there's that visibility there, and just understanding, as you say, there's always that stereotype, isn't there, with technology coming in and what you're actually going to be doing day to day. And can we ask you a little bit about your coding career? What has your journey looked like there, your career journey in coding?
So when I started at Simulate, primarily I was working as a consultant, and our software it's maths and stats based, so it's technical, and a few of the projects required me to start dabbling, I guess, in writing sort of mini kind of like almost applications. And from there, that's where my curiosity was kind of sparked, and it just sort of gradually grew from kind of there. And I went to our founder of the company and sort of said, you know, doing a bit of this coding and I quite like it. I don't know, would there be any possibility I could just do a bit more of that or explore with them? And he jumps at it and he was so supportive. And he gave me my first coding lessons. You know, okay, here's what a function is, here's what a procedure is, here how it all kind of comes together. Because I think when you haven't done software and coding, how you go from some words and numbers and how it creates this visual thing is it's quite a hard concept to get you around. And so from there, just gradually started doing more coding, and then formally made the switch, and sort of went into software development, where I started building up building features in our tool, small bugs, features. You gradually do bigger features, bigger bugs, and then ended up leading the development team, so run the development team, and then from there progressed into CTO, so Chief Technology Officer. So I don't do as much coding as I would like these days. It's much more about strategy and sort of product management and various different kind of parts. But yeah, so it starts off small, and then I think it just gets sort of bigger. But I've had no formal training along the way, which I'm not embarrassed to say. You know, I think being coached and mentored, and you know, and these days there's lots more options available, things like CodePlan or similar kind of places where they can help you do that switch. But even without training, you can do it. It's just a skill. It's just a skill that anyone can learn.
Yeah, and it's that hunger, I suppose, isn't it, to keep learning in an area that you're really enjoying. I know I took some training in it was very beginners HTML and CSS years ago, and I thought I'll go down this route. I write about it a lot. I'll learn to code, and as much as I enjoyed it, I think I got to a point where I thought, for me to go on and to learn and to actually have a job in this area, I really have to commit at this point and, you know, go off and keep learning. And I think I mentally hit a wall, and maybe it wasn't for me, but it's just finding that path for you, isn't it? And just to continually learn. And as you say, I suppose you must reach a point then when you realize, actually, I could go on and apply for a job in this. You know, I'm now at a point where I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, and yeah, you do, and I suppose you always feel a bit of imposter syndrome. I think we all do for various different reasons. But I think when you're making a switch like that, you always feel a bit like, but I haven't got the degree. Am I qualified enough? But I think it's remembering all the other parts that you bring in, and also a bit like yourself, you can code for a while. Switching into coding doesn't mean coding forever, and you can bring different parts to it. So part of making the switch from being a consultant into managing the development team and becoming the CTO was also learning about what's the best practice in terms of how you run a software development team. You know, things like agile and things like that were just coming out at this time, and so it was understanding what's the best way to create a best performing team. What's the right way to approach developing a product and making sure that it sticks to a vision and delivers on that vision and is cohesive as well. And so as you go through your career and sort of in a product kind of company, for want of a better of a word, or tech, the skills you need change slightly, and they don't all, coding is almost like your entry point, you know, and you need all these other skills, the soft skills, I guess, as well as kind of the technical kind of skills. So I think you can start, I guess is what I'm saying, and sometimes like yourself, you maybe hit the ceiling and you think, okay, I've explored this, it was curious, it was fun, and I've gone as far as
where do I go?
Yeah, or maybe you start to see the other possibilities, you know, and having that foundation opens you up to other places. Like you said in your intro, you can be a UX designer, you can just be a great project manager, you can be a great team leader. You don't always need to code for the entire of your career.
Yeah, I think the great thing about coding as well is that you can do it at any point in your career. It's not that you have to be a student and you learn to code and you go off and you get your first job in technology. We had a webinar recently, and a lot of our speakers were asking, I'm in my 40s or I'm in my 50s, is it too late to learn to code? And one of our speakers, she learned to code on maternity leave, and she realized the job that she was in wasn't working for her in terms of work-life balance, and she learned to code, and she went off and she's a junior developer now. So I think that's the beauty of it. You can learn if you want to go off and learn something new. You can do it at any stage.
You absolutely can. You absolutely can learn it at any stage, and there's so many resources out there now as well to kind of help you kind of learn. And it's also realizing that you might feel that you're starting from zero, but you probably aren't. And because I'd done maths and stats, I knew how to think logically. So there was a huge proportion of the learning was already done, because you have worked with people for a long time, or you already know how to sort of get the right information out of people, as a consultant. So there's lots of skills that you're already bringing to it that you bring something unique to it, I guess. Everybody does, and you have more of a bounce point than you kind of think. But and there's lots of opportunities, and I think that's the thing as well, is that you can learn it on your maternity leave. You don't need to be doing it in your work. You can build a little website just for whatever kind of reason, or you can program your Raspberry Pi to run your heating system at home. There's lots of different ways just to explore it without making a commitment and seeing, do I enjoy it? Is it fun? Is this something I want to learn a bit more of before you commit?
Yeah. And in terms of day to day, what does a coding day look like? Right, you said you don't code as much anymore, but what did it look like, when you did?
So I think the picture that everybody would have, and is like you're sitting in front of a laptop or a computer and you're just sort of bashing code out all day long. I think that's the picture that you get. And don't get me wrong, there are days like that, and actually sometimes they're really good fun days, because it's the ultimate problem solving when you're building something. So there are definitely days like that, but then there's actually a lot of human interaction with it, so they're particularly simulating the way that we approach kind of coding. I don't have software developers. I have product developers, because we try to integrate sort of the product thinking and the software development skills together. So you're really thinking about the users. So sometimes it's speaking to users and sort of understanding, right, okay, how are you using this feature? Is it working for you? What's not working for you? What other pain points are you kind of having? It's interacting with other people in the company to understand, right, what direction is the company going in, so that I can think about what direction the software is going to kind of go in. So there's a lot of speaking to people. There's a lot of thinking about how I'm going to approach designing a feature so that it's going to be usable, and it's going to create a good kind of experience. Then there's thinking about how am I going to structure my code now to make it work really well. And then you get to the coding part and you're doing it. And then after you've done the coding part, and I think this is the part that's probably where you need your resilience, and it's sometimes frustrating because you've coded it and then you take it out for feedback and for testing, and you figure out, okay, right, well, I didn't get that bit quite right. Okay, and there's a bug here and whatever else. So then you need to work your way through that and sort of, so there's the whole kind of release kind of procedure as well. So yeah. So it's much more
quite a lot before you get to the actual coding.
yeah, there is, and there should be. If you're doing it right, because at the end of the day, your code is only useful or valid or kind of has a purpose if it's produced something that somebody can use, that they get value from, and they don't think about the software. So I don't want my users to think about my software. I want them to think about the problem that they're solving. So the ultimate is that the feature has just been so seamless and so intuitive for them to use that they haven't had to think about it. And they just think about the problem that they're solving. So there's a lot of thought that goes into that first point to get that right.
Yeah, and that leads nicely on to my next question about what skills do you need for a career in coding, because you mentioned there problem solving, you mentioned that your background in maths has helped and logical thinking, but it also sounds like you really need to be a team player as well. I mean, you would have a lot of contact with a lot of colleagues from the day that you just described. So there's a lot more to it than just, technical skills.
Yeah, no, there absolutely is. I mean, it starts with the technical skills. So you're dead right. The logical thinking, and that is a huge kind of part of it. but communication, and it's communication in lots of different ways. There's communication with your own personal team members and sort of building those relationships, you know, just understanding how to speak to one another about the right approaches, how we're going to collaborate kind of together. There is communication with users, and being able to, it's almost consultative, so being able to hear what you're saying. I don't like this, I'm frustrated by this, but actually being able to get at the real nugget of what it is that they need, because often what people will express is what they're frustrated with, not actually what, and they think they know what's going to solve the problem, but that's not necessarily kind of it. So there's communication at that kind of level. There's then, as you go further on in your career, there's communicating to board or to kind of to customers, or kind of that kind of type of communication as well. So also being able to communicate well with technical people, be able to communicate technical things to non-technical people is another kind of like skill that's kind of there as well. But I think an awful lot of it, when the communication, it comes down to simplification, you know, and I think that's a real skill, that if you can just take things back to the simple kind of core, what's the real problem that we're trying to solve here, and what's the simplest way to communicate that to people. I think that's a big part of it as well. And the other kind of part, like I said, you will get lots of bugs. The only certainty that with software is that there will be bugs that you fix as many people. So you also need some resilience to get you through those days as well.
Yeah. You mentioned there a lot about communication. Has any of that changed because of COVID and remote working, or has that actually improved the way that teams work?
It's definitely a challenge. It's definitely a challenge. And I think particularly when you're onboarding new staff members, you know, you miss everybody around the table and being able to see, as a leader, I miss just being able to look at somebody and sort of say, oh, what's going on there? You all right? You know, and just being able to kind of check in and realize that they're stuck, and just give that kind of instant kind of advice. So there are kind of challenges with it, but equally you have things like Slack and everything else, and sort of web meetings. And so sometimes it's easier to get people together because we can get them all on a web kind of, so there's pluses and minuses. There's definitely pluses and minuses kind of to it.
Yeah. And so you mentioned you don't have a computer science degree, but do you have any advice for our listeners who perhaps they're looking to get into coding but don't have a degree? You mentioned that you weren't formally trained. Have you got any advice there on where to get started and what to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first part of advice I would give is to say, just do it. You know, just do it. Don't be scared by it. Because like I said earlier, I think coding can, especially the way it's depicted on television, you know, these super geniuses are just in like 30 seconds creating kind of something, and it just appears like magic. It can seem big and scary, but the reality is you're going to start small. And that's what I would say is start small with something. Some of the earliest projects I did were more what I would call hacking than programming, you know, sort of taking some website code and getting the colors to change and things like that. So understanding it. So I think starting small, and then there are so many resources out there now, you know, so if you've got your Code Academy, there's all sorts of kind of websites and things that you can go on where you can just do a little kind of sample kind of projects. So I think start small, and then pick a little private project, something that's going to deliver value to you, or it's going to be fun as well, and just do something that's useful. And then as you progress, I think if you make that decision, I'd find a mentor. You know, find a mentor that's going to help you, I suppose, point you in the right direction. You know, I think some of the reasons I was able to do it without formal training was because our founder was able to say, right, okay, this is what you need to know now. You've learned this kind of part, right? Now what you need to know is how to structure the data, right? Go off and sort of learn about that. Or now you need to know how to kind of architect something in a sort of slightly bigger way. So if you can find a mentor that will guide you kind of through it as well, and I think that will help you. I think that will help you an awful lot.
Yeah, you just touched upon resources there and finding resources that work for you. Do you have any favourite resources, books, networking groups that you're part of?
Yeah, I mean, some of like I said, I've said a few times, I think for me, certainly in the role that I do, product and software development are so kind of interlinked. So some of the resources that I point people to, particularly if you're thinking about working in a product company, are actually around product management. So it's a really, really old book, but one of my favorite books is one that's called Don't Make Me Think. And it's just a really simple book that shows you pictures of websites, things that were good from a usability point of view, things that were kind of bad. And the whole premise is just don't make the user think, and so I think that's a great book for sort of getting your head into sort of thinking like a user, and sort of how you design things. And so similarly, Mind the Product, who do conferences, and they sort of do kind of blogs and things like that. They do some great kind of thinking around that. I think you touched on networking, and I think that's something that wasn't available very early in my kind of career and is now in abundance. Obviously, COVID, there was a gap, but we're now going back to that. And so, yeah, so I would say you go out and network, and there's so many different kind of groups, and probably finding something local, because then it gives you people that you can go for a coffee. So we're a member of Scotland IS, which is a trade body up in Scotland for the tech sector, and they do lots of great conferences and events, and I've met so many people there. One of my favourite ones is the CTO meetup, which I call my personal therapy session, just because it's great to go and talk. I think what's good about the networking, and what I would say is if you're making a switch, try and find a networking environment where there's other people that have made the switch, because a big part of what the networking gives you is just sort of saying, right, oh, I'm finding this really frustrating, this is really difficult, and somebody else going, yeah, me too, and you go, oh, okay.
Yes, just hearing it's not just you. Yes.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, go and find something local, and find something with similar kind of people in a similar position, to what you're trying to, tackle the career in the similar way that you are.
Yeah, because it must be quite easy to sit at home and you're sitting there, thinking you're learning, and you might hit a wall, you might be struggling on what to do next. And just to hear other people say, it's not just you, would just give you so much energy and inspiration to keep going and think, it's okay, I'll get over it and try something different.
Well, and then as well with the networking as well, you'll probably find that, going to conferences and different things, you just hear different ideas, and there's maybe a problem that you've been battling again and again, and you hear somebody's got a slightly different way of approaching it, whether that's the running of the team or how they've approached a particular technical and you think, okay, right, and suddenly you can see the way forward as well. So it's a combination of that, but the support is invaluable, and just support.
Now, it's well known that there aren't enough women in technology, and we're firm believers that you can code, and that you can't be what you can't see, which we already spoke about earlier. And you wanted to be a lawyer, for instance, because you saw it on TV. Do you have any role models in tech now?
It's a really tough one. I have so many role models. I'm really privileged in all the different roles that I've worked in with various different boards, and sort of at Simulate to work with so many amazing female kind of people. So there's actually too many to mention. And I suppose for me, my role models are more the people that I see day to day, if you know what I mean, and see and can learn from, and seeing those kind of like small kind of interactions. So yeah, but I do know what you mean. And it comes back to what we were saying earlier, how do you show girls and boys about the options that are there? Because I think some of the challenges that we know, we need to get more women into the tech sector, but equally we need to get more boys into there as well and show them the full range of possibilities. So showing them their role models. And I think for me, in terms of, because I have a daughter, she's 13, and I'm constantly trying to get her into coding. It's not working, I have to say. That's kind of what who wants to do what their mum wants to do. I know I certainly kind of didn't, so possibly kind of a lost cause. But I think for girls, it's as much showing them role models, but showing them that there are no limits as well. So letting them know that it doesn't matter if they're a girl or a boy for these kind of types of roles. But most importantly, just letting them have visibility of the roles. Because there are, I think there are so many amazing males in the tech sector, and I think they can be role models as well, because I think it's showing kids today what the options are, and showing that wide variety of them, and yeah, hopefully showing them a balance of females and males, but equally let's use the males that are here in this sector as well, because they're great. The people that get males in this sector are fantastic.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you actually next about what more can be done to encourage more women into coding, and I think you touched upon it there, and just making sure, and it's not just women into coding, as you say, just that people understand the role and what it's about. We had a lady on here a few weeks ago that we were talking about, you know, how did you get into technology? And she said, you know, she hadn't considered a career in coding at all, and she just happened to be at a careers fair and she started talking to somebody, and that was it. It was just that visibility of somebody standing there that has done the role, and just told her about it. But you know, unless you see people, unless people come into your school or your university, how do you know what that role is going to be like? You know, unless it's on TV. And funny enough, when it's on TV, it tends to be that nerdy stereotype that turns everybody off.
Yeah, it does, and I think, and there definitely is. There's a challenge. I mean, the tech sector has, we have a huge skills shortage, you know, so there are far more jobs than there are people available. So we need to get as many people into the tech sector as possible. I think there's lots of work being done at schools and at universities, and you know, so many kind of programs and raising awareness. There's much more that can be done, but I think, you know, it's night and day compared to what it was 10, 15 years ago. But I think in terms of thinking about the skills shortage and also the opportunity therefore there are for people right now, we need people now, you know. So I do think when we think about how can we get more people, more women into tech, I think there's a challenge to say, right, how do we get people that are in early to mid stages or even late stages of their careers, how do we show them what the options are, show them that there are realistic and achievable and easy ways to make a switch into this career, and also let them see that you know, we've got a skills shortage, we can fill those with new grads, but equally we've got a skills shortage through the whole pipeline, you know. So we're short on senior team leads, we're short on project managers. So just because you haven't been working in tech, you know, you can come in and take some of those skills, and we've got gaps here kind of for you that are ideal for you. So it's the challenge is how do we get that message out there as widely as possible, because that will help us in the tech sector fill some of the gaps. But equally, because the tech sector, there are so many gaps, I mean, the salaries are fantastic. So there are real opportunities out there for people to grab and really make a difference to their own personal lives as well.
Yeah, I also find that something that people outside of tech don't realize. As you said, the salaries are great, and you know, the travel is great. And when you go to a conference, 9 times out of 10, technology companies, you know, they don't put you up in a small B&B. You know, they always make sure that you're in a nice hotel and you have a nice networking event. And I don't think people realize probably the experience that you get when you work in technology.
Yeah, you do, and the exposure and the possibilities. I mean, my kids are forever saying, "Oh, have you been there, Mum?" Yeah, I have been. When did you go there? We haven't. Yeah, I went there with work. You know, I've travelled the world with work. Really privileged to have done kind of that. Yeah, it's. I think also in today's world as well, you know, I'm really privileged to work in an environment that means I can take my kids to school every morning and I can pick them up from school, and I can be the CTO of a multinational, multi-billion pound, you know, company. Do you know what I mean? So I can get that work-life balance that, and so many of my friends that I see that can't get that because they're confined to an office. They have to be, you know, they have to be there to do their kind of the job. So I think there are, particularly for not just for women, I think that's true for males that want to come into the sector as well. You know, that there's the possibilities, the experiences that you can get, the ability to just move around and find the right fit for you, but then also to have that work-life balance as well, and yeah, get paid well for it.
Yeah. Well, that is a nice positive point to end on, because we are already out of time. So thank you so much, Frances, for coming in and chatting with us this morning. It's been an absolute pleasure.
No, thank you for having me. And hopefully maybe we'll have inspired just one more person to move into code would be good.
Yes, that would be great. And to everybody listening, as always, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again next time.